John.
How are you today?
How are you?
Good. Can you hear me all right?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to wait a few minutes before we get started. So, do you have any questions for me?
Not really. I think you're going to kind of lead the show here.
Yeah. Well, we're going to do it together. How's that?
That works for me. Do I need to pull up the outline and stuff, or
I've got the outline in front of me. So,
flip on my other screen? I'm going to go get some water and stuff. I'll be back in 4 minutes.
Okay. All right. Hey, Dad, I'm in the middle of a podcast. Okay, all right. Bye.
Mute my phone or it explodes. And the cat, you can probably hear the cat.
I haven't heard the cat yet.
You want some attention.
Well, just to give you a little tip, a little sidebar on this, on my education, I have a degree in agriculture and background in natural resources, and my master's, spent a lot of time in urban planning. So kind of a all around the place girl here. So I am familiar with your topic.
Uh-oh. Yeah, froze there.
There you are. The gremlins, the internet gremlins have been crazy today. So,
yeah.
So,
what's going on there? That's interesting. Let's see here. Buy some of the stuff. See if I maybe just got too much stuff open. That should be pretty decent. We'll see.
Okay. All right. We'll get started. So, welcome to this episode of Timber Talks, the podcast that dives deep into the roots of forestry and arboriculture. I'm your host, Mindy, and today we're joined by special guest John Snow, owner and consulting master arborist for Tree Checkup LLC, which is an arborist consulting firm in Florida and the Southwest. He is also the president-elect for the Florida Urban Forestry Council. John brings a wealth of knowledge and experience managing over 100,000 trees across various sectors. He is an ISA board-certified master arborist and a respected member of the American Society of Consulting Arborists. Today, we'll explore the intrinsic world of tree care, learn about the latest in arboricultural technology, and gain practical insights into maintaining and preserving our green heritage. Welcome, John. So, there's been many changes in arboriculture. I'm of the age that I can remember doing some horrible things to trees. So what are some innovations in arboriculture that you have seen that have evolved in your career, and how technology is playing a bigger role in arboriculture?
Absolutely. That's such a great question, Mindy. And I mean, there's so many different directions that you go with that. I came up, I've been doing this for over 30 years now. And, I've seen a lot of different changes just simply from the way we treat trees. Some of the older techniques were macro injections, and then now we have micro injections that's literally like a needle going into a tree to provide, insecticides or fertilizers, things like that. So, things have really kind of gotten a lot more refined. I think the technology overall has improved. I grew up in the era where we didn't have computers. And now that we have computers and we have AI now, we're starting to see a lot of more radical changes in the industry as far as, just leveraging technology. For example, one of the things that I started doing a while back was, a few years now, was I became a drone pilot. I got my FAA license, and so I actually utilize the drones and stuff like that to help map larger properties, evaluate trees, get that aerial view without necessarily having to climb the tree, like what we would have had to do 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I have 3 drones. I use my 3 drones in different aspects of some things that I do. So drones have really changed things up in many cases. So As far as diagnostic and tree health assessment, what are some, you mentioned about the micro versus the macro approach. What groundbreaking tools or methods does Tree Checkup LLC use? I mean, when I said the horrible things we did, we would trim a tree and cover the wound with tar. And I know you don't do that anymore.
No, that's not a recommended practice anymore.
No.
Yeah, as far as a lot of the stuff, I try to keep things relatively simple in the practice. The reality of it is not every tree needs a, in-depth, heavy-duty diagnostic process where you're coming out with a tool like a tomograph or something that is almost taking like this X-ray of the tree. There's times where that is needed. So some of the tools that I use are very simple. I use like an air spade to do root collar excavations to identify problems in the root system. We use, like I said, the drone a lot to, get that aerial imagery of the tree, get into nooks and crannies with
You froze, John.
the tree, which requires a little bit of skill to got a thunderstorm here in the area, and so
Yeah.
my internet's maybe a little in and out. But like I was saying, we use the drones. Sometimes I use a resistor route, do some drilling on the tree. But for the most part, it's just pretty much everyday evaluations, not going super crazy unless it's warranted.
Okay. All right. How has advancements, you touched on how technology has helped your consultations. Can you think of any like massive advancement that has helped you with your large scale projects besides internet?
Yeah, as far as like the technology goes on that side, we've invested in, a lot of GPS equipment where we can actually go out and, basically get the location of the tree at a sub-meter level. So a lot of the properties that I'm working on are very large, anywhere from 10 to a couple hundred acres, maybe even 1,600 acres at times. And so having an accurate location of where these trees are is critical. And then being able to go in and precisely using software to inventory the trees, rate the condition of the trees, take notes, all of those kind of things. That 20 years ago, we would have been doing basically on paper and pencil out in the field and then trying to bring it in to the office, and put it into a spreadsheet or something, and it may just sit on a shelf. So a lot of the tools that I use really give me much more actionable recommendations. So, like I kind of indicated, Mindy, I like to try to keep things as simple as possible unless it's warranted. So I kind of go through an iterative process where we inspect the tree and then make some determinations. And if it requires that more advanced assessment, then we'll go ahead and look at doing that.
So are you using any form of remote sensing when you are involved in diagnosing the tree?
I really am not. For most of the projects that I'm involved with, we don't necessarily need remote sensing at this point. I've toyed around with the idea of using LiDAR and, photogrammetry, things like that. I think that there's opportunities there. I've just not seen that the technology is quite there just yet. Probably within maybe another 5 years, it'll get down to a point where hopefully it'll be a little bit more affordable, and the software that goes with all of that stuff will be a lot more refined, and that's the biggest issue. I think the software development side of it's not quite there yet.
Okay, all right. So looking toward the future of tree care, there's been, kind of a eureka moment that we have come to realize that the earth is changing, and good, bad, ugly is going to cause some more problems to our outdoor environment. So, do you have any suggestions on some emerging technologies that you are aware of or practices that you think are going to change the future of arboriculture in the next decade?
Like as you kind of hit on it with some of like the remote sensing and some of the LiDAR. I know that there's several different programs out there now where they're looking at kind of this digital twin of the urban forest, which is a really cool concept. Like I said, I think it's just going to take some time. You know, it requires so much bandwidth and so much processing power. I think there's that aspect of it along with the software. And once that all kind of comes together, I think that's going to be an absolute game changer for the industry, particularly from a municipal standpoint, but from a practical everyday arborist, it still is really going to boil down to just getting out and touching the trees.
Right. Do you think robots will ever, we have robots that mow our grass now. Do you think robots will ever play a role in this field?
I could see in some applications, absolutely, particularly in like the utility sector. I think that could be very, very useful in the utility sector, doing some of like these large transmission line printing, things like that.
Freeze
again.
Yeah, you froze again, but that's okay. So do you see, due to the changes that we have outside going on now, that's essentially out of our control, are you seeing more need for your services, or do you, does the demand seem to be pretty flat as far as the world changes?
Wow. That's, again, a really great question. And I think that as an industry, arboriculture is a growing industry. With a lot of the development that's going on, many of the forested areas that we're accustomed to having, are now becoming deforested. Urban developments are coming in. So you have this transition between the forest and the urban forest. And that brings some pretty unique challenges into the whole factor of how you're going to manage individual trees or groups of trees within community developments, municipalities, and such.
Okay. For someone who is inspiring to enter this field, what kind of skills or knowledge areas do you see the most crucial in the coming years?
Again, great questions here, Mindy. There's so many different areas, and I think one thing that listeners really need to kind of take away from this is that arboriculture is a very generalized industry. There's different sectors like the municipal sector, the utility sector, commercial sector. But the reality of it is we're actually collaborating with so many other different disciplines: landscape architects, planners, developers, even bankers in some cases that may be financing projects. And so I think some of the key skill sets is being able to communicate well, having good understanding of tree biology, tree identification, soil science, water management. Those are the four real key areas, as well as tree physiology. Just understanding how trees work is really critical to the whole process. And then being able to communicate that with the stakeholders.
Okay. Do you ever see, I talked to another person who felt that arboriculture was kind of swinging into more of like vocation, where, a vocation like being an electrician, where possibly there might be a journeyman type of program to encourage more people to enter that field and help educate the future generations in a safe way. Do you see that as a possibility, or do you see just the path continuing the way it has been?
Wow. That's really deep and pretty insightful, because I think there's two real versions of arboriculture and kind. One is that trade aspect of it, of the guy that's out there pruning trees, fertilizing trees, treating insects, diseases, things like that. So there is definitely a vocational component or trade component of that. And I think that that's very, very relevant and very, very important. When you get to a certain point in things, it kind of shifts from being a vocation to more of a professional sort of level. What I deal with as a consulting arborist is very different. I don't consider myself a tradesperson. I used to do that. I used to climb trees. It might not look like it now, but I used to climb and prune trees and do treatments, all that stuff. But at this point in my career as a consulting arborist, my focus is looking more bigger picture, doing diagnostic work, doing tree risk assessments. That's not a vocation. That's a little deeper.
Right.
You have kind of a professional aspect to things, and then you have that vocational, because I view vocational tradesmen as like the person who's actually doing the work. And then you have people that may be supervising, directing, managing the work, and beyond.
Okay. So what are some, if someone was thinking about doing this, what would be some practical advice you would have for arborists when it comes with dealing with common issues that you encounter in tree management? And what are the standard practices when it comes to addressing them? Do you address issues different from if you're in an urban environment or you're dealing with a forest? Do you deal with issues, or are there issues that come up that you have to deal separately because of the two different environments?
Yeah, I think arborists need to educate themselves on the problems that are inherent in their region. Even though trees grow worldwide, they have specific regional issues that vary, and the treatments are going to vary as well. Generally speaking, much of this stuff can be applied kind of across the board. When I got started in Illinois. Now I'm down in Florida. Well, fact is, trees that grow in Illinois are very different from the trees in Florida, but the principles remain the same. So again, it goes back to understanding the basics of tree biology, tree physiology, things like that. I think some of the things that people could really look towards doing is becoming a certified arborist that demonstrates that basic level of understanding about the industry, the practices, and such. Arborists need to familiarize themselves with the ANSI standards, the American National Standards out there. You have the tree pruning standard. You have the lightning protection standard, the cabling and bracing standards. So there are standards and guidelines out there for the industry, and people need to understand that and adopt those in their practices.
Okay. All right. So, can you give us an example of a complex tree risk assessment and how you approach it? And I think maybe explaining what a tree risk assessment is, because some people may not know what that actually is.
Sure. A tree risk assessment can be pretty complex at times, for sure. What we're looking for in tree risk assessment is conditions that present themselves that are a concern that, through training and experience and examining the tree, you determine the level of risk of a tree part or the whole tree failing. That requires a lot of training, a lot of experience, observation, and understanding how trees grow and how trees fail. And so that's really that's kind of a very general, broad view of tree risk assessment. There is an actual qualification program that arborists should go through. And it also involves communicating with the stakeholders, whether it be a homeowner or municipal government and stuff like that, because they're going to oftentimes require a report, for permitting processes and things like that, demonstrating, well, the tree actually does present risk. And so one of the tools that I use a lot for that is, just a simple, good camera phone, or a phone, with a great camera. It's what I'm trying to say there. I don't use the 35 millimeter cameras like we used to, but, the camera on my iPhone does a fabulous job, documenting things, and, you can go in and edit the photos and point out, hey, here's a pocket of decay in this limb. This presents a potential risk, and maybe that limb needs to be pruned. Tree risk assessment is not about removing trees. It's actually about trying to preserve trees by mitigating these problems through good pruning practices. Removal is really the last resort.
Okay. For our listeners who are part of community associations or manage large properties, what are your top tips for effective tree planting and preservation?
Wow, that's great. There's so many different ways, Mindy, that you could skin that cat. I think the first and most important thing for community associations or larger populations of trees, maybe it's a campus. I deal with a lot of community associations. Even maybe like a business park is another good example. You really need to understand the trees that you have there. You need to assess independently. And, they're just making some general recommendations. Whereas, you need to treat trees on an individual basis. Not every tree needs to be trimmed at 30 feet, for example. Mm-hmm. And so just simply by going in and identifying the trees that you have and identifying the needs and then developing these actionable recommendations, it's going to save community associations a lot of money, and it's going to extend the lives of the trees. Because at the end of the day, once you prune that limb, you can't put it back.
That's very true. Very true. I just have had this kind of burning question. Are you seeing problems with invasive species? Because I know as far as landscaping goes, that can be an issue. So are you seeing more problems with this, or not really a change as far as invasive species in the properties that you consult on?
Oh, I see a fair amount of invasive species on a lot of the properties that I deal with here in Florida in particular. We have Brazilian pepper just about everywhere, which is very invasive. It's amazing. You go into some of these places and it's like, wow, and the strange part about it is people don't even recognize that it's actually an invasive species. And then, you have tallow trees, camphor trees can be invasive. I see a fair amount of invasives. I don't think that that's necessarily changed over the years per se.
Well, I know we have a big issue with Bradford pear. So,
I've seen that too.
Yes, I the situation's not going to get any better. So, our highways are landscaped and they take over. The Bradford pears do. So it's
crazy. I was out on a property about 2 months ago as a wooded property, undeveloped, and literally I'm walking through these woods, and in the middle of the woods I look up, I'm like, that's a Bradford pear. Where did this come from?
Yes. That is, yeah. Bradford pear and honeysuckle. That's a big issue. And burning bush. That's in my area. That's the big issue. So I was just curious if you were seeing with the global change that we're having, if you were seeing more problems with invasive species.
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think as time goes on, we may see that, but again, it's so incremental. It's very difficult to kind of in your mind, kind of mentally track that.
Right. So thank you so much, John, for sharing your invaluable insights and experience with us today. It's clear that your passion and dedication to arboriculture are making a significant impact, especially those who still use tar in their trees. To our listeners, if you're interested in learning more about tree care or need expert advice, be sure to visit Tree Checkup LLC website. Don't forget to subscribe to Timber Talks for more conversations like this. We have new episodes every week exploring the many facets of forestry and conservation. I'm Mindy. Keep growing your knowledge and take care of the trees. They do take care of us. So do you have any questions for me, John?
No, I think we're in good shape there. Hopefully my internet held up enough. It's been a challenge today. I've got storms in my area, so, my fingers crossed that everything, works out. So, but very interesting. Like I said, I pruned my fair share of trees and I have to remind my dad all the time, we don't put tar anymore. Just don't do it. So, well, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks much. I appreciate it.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.